We have to make a real, integrated, global effort. At the moment, we've so degraded natural systems, ecosystems, biodiversity. It's becoming increasingly impossible for nature to sustain us. So we can't go on, I think, equivocating on this and just expect us to test the world ultimately to destruction before you can prove that you have destroyed it. Which is what I've been trying to get across for all these years, and to explain that there is life after apparent death from the current conventional approach.
Governments, businesses, and institutions are colluding in the largest central planning effort to ever be dreamed up, under the guise of saving the planet. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals provide the outline of this delusional plan. Alexander Solzhenitsyn described the fundamental flaws of the United Nations back in 1972 during his Nobel lecture, delivered by letter as he was unable to attend in person, still oppressed by the authoritarian regime of his lifetime. A quarter of a century ago, the United Nations organization was born amid the great hopes of mankind. But alas, in an immoral world, it too grew up without morality. It is not a United Nations organization, but a United Governments organization, where governments freely elected are equated with regimes imposed by force, or with those that have gained control by an armed seizure of power. By dint of the self-interested bias of the majority of its members, the UN jealously guards the freedom of certain peoples and completely neglects the freedom of others. Through an obeisant vote, it has rejected the investigation of private grievances, the moans, cries, and entreaties of humble individual mere people who were judged entities just too minuscule for such a great organization. Its best document in the 25 years of its existence, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN has not taken the trouble to make mandatory for its member governments a condition of membership, and has thereby abandoned little people to the mercy of governments they did not elect. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Bill of Rights, and various charters and constitutions were built upon the Enlightenment principles of the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was written by a group of 13th century barons to protect their rights and property against a tyrannical king. It is concerned with many practical matters and specific grievances relevant to the feudal system under which they lived. There are two principles expressed in Magna Carta that resonate to this day. No free man shall be taken, imprisoned, deceased, outlawed, banished, or in any way destroyed, nor will we proceed against or prosecute him, except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. To no one will we sell, to no one will we deny or delay right or justice. The Magna Carta provided the fundamental inspiration for Americans in the making of their Constitution, the most robust charter for human rights ever created, the prime example for the ideals of liberty worldwide.
The interdependence between human health and planetary health has never been more clear. As we start a new decade, it is time to focus on the future we wish to build, and indeed leave for generations to come. Humanity has made incredible progress over the past century, yet the cost of this progress has caused immense destruction to the planet that sustains us. We simply cannot maintain this course indefinitely. To build a productive and sustainable future, it is critical that we accelerate and mainstream sustainability into every aspect of our economy. To move forward, there must be a center of gravity to catalyze such a monumental effort and to mobilize the resources and incentives required. To that end, building on my Sustainable Markets Initiative, I am launching the Terra Carta as the basis of a recovery plan for nature, people, and planet. At this historic tipping point, with the lives and livelihoods of present and future generations in mind, the Terra Carta aims to provide a roadmap for acceleration towards an ambitious and sustainable future.
In a bold, hubristic gesture, Prince Charles is now perverting the Magna Carta by naming his new fascist plan, the Terra Carta, in its image. He is taking the most significant foundational charter for inalienable human rights and twisting its namesake into something evil that will attempt to enslave humans under the guise of protecting the planet. By placing Mother Nature above man, this tyrannical prince seeks to place God's kingdom above God himself. There is a reason that the Enlightenment was based on the Judeo-Christian tradition, catalyzed by the notion that man was made in God's image. The garden was to be cultivated by man and not the other way around. It is with good reason that we call our birthright God-given. It offers us the absolute protection that no one can remove our rights, for no man has the authority to give or take the natural freedom we are born into. History is littered with examples of men who would like to play God and the homicidal consequences. Our present-day cabal of elites is abundant with these types, and Mark Carney, prominent World Economic Forum trustee, is one of the worst types, yet he often flies under the radar.
There's a fundamental rewiring of the economy that is just begun, and it's that scale of change that is necessary in order to accomplish the climate goals. Now that does take, it has to start now, but it will take the balance of the decade to really break the back of it.
Former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, closely advises the prime ministers of both Canada and the UK from his lofty heights of UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. Carney draws inspiration from, among others, Marx, Engels, and Lenin, but the agenda he promotes differs from Marxism in two key respects. First, the private sector is not to be expropriated, but made a partner in reshaping the economy and society. Second, it does not make a promise to make the lives of ordinary people better, but worse. Carney's Brave New World will be one of severely constrained choice. Less flying, less meat, more inconvenience, and more poverty. Assets will be stranded. Used gasoline-powered cars will be unsaleable. Inefficient properties will be unrentable, he promises.
Do you worry that investment in aviation is going to be a stranded asset at some point?
I think it will become more difficult if there aren't technological solutions found. Yes, I do. I think any industry that in 10 years' time has the same carbon footprint as today is going to have challenges and therefore has the risk of being a stranded asset.
All right.
His answer to what he and his cohorts declare a climate crisis is a technocratic dictatorship. All this is based on the notion that humans are the cause of catastrophic climate change and that carbon emissions need to be reduced in order to avoid an apocalyptic climate crisis. This is perhaps the biggest lie of our era, supported by the pseudoscience of highly political, unelected organizations such as the IPCC and other NGOs.
To the IPCC, to the authors, and to everyone who has been involved in this latest climate alarm. Your work, based on science, is particularly appreciated given the disruption of COVID-19. You've been telling us for over 3 decades of the dangers of allowing the planet to warm. The world listened, but didn't hear. The world listened, but it did not act strongly enough. And as a result, climate change is a problem that is here now. Nobody's safe, and it's getting worse faster. We must treat climate change as an immediate threat just as we must treat the connected crisis of nature and biodiversity loss and pollution and waste as immediate threats.
The notion that CO2, the natural byproduct of all human activity and life on this green earth, is inherently problematic is not only false, but it is being weaponized against humanity itself. The obsession with CO2 emissions as the cause of an anthropogenic climate crisis is a dangerous invention by Malthusian minds. It is a widely disproven doomsday prophecy propagated by those who see humanity as a pestilence and used by small, pathetic, profiteering men who hate the entirety of mankind as a justification for its erasure. COVID totalitarianism is only the gateway to the most pervasive and all-encompassing madness that ever infected the minds of false idols. Green totalitarianism seeks to find a final solution to the movement of all men, indiscriminate of creed or race. Like all totalitarian ideologies, it obliterates the notion of the sacrosanct nature of human life. But far more pernicious than sacrificing individuals for the collective, it moves on to the absolutely vicious goal, sacrificing the collective for Mother Nature. Belgian philosopher Drieu Godefroedi exposes the hatred of man driving this ideology in his book, The Green Reich. He points out that early environmentalist theorists, such as Hans Jonas and Paul Ehrlich, were calling for population reduction and forced sterilization to save the planet long before the theory of man-made global warming was ever invented. Godefroedi explains how freedom is incompatible with environmentalism and describes the fundamental differences between the genocidal ideologies that came before it, such as Marxism. Productivism is foreign to environmentalism. It is even antithetical to it. Environmentalism does not intend to seize the means of production to increase and distribute the fruits in an equal manner. Environmentalism plans to seize the means of production to stop it.
You'll notice that when he does tackle some pretty important problems in our society, he always tries to end it up with a cure, which is more growth. And of course, growth is a disease, not the cure.
Godefroedi's thesis is that if human CO2 is the problem, then man is the problem. Therefore, man must be restricted, constrained, and governed in all of his activities, describing the totalitarian environmentalist algorithm, which followed to its infallible logical conclusion, arrives at the final solution: the depopulation of the earth.
Dr. Ehrlich, when did the thought first come to you that perhaps our time as mankind on Earth was limited?
I don't know, it was sort of intuitive, I suppose. I just felt it deep down in myself that this was the only way at the end of the day. And I just felt it was otherwise going to fall apart. Everything was being designed, and still is in many ways, to battle against nature and to suppress and destroy, exploit. But it may have gone a little bit too far in terms of the exploitation we've imposed on the natural world, which I suppose you could get away with for a certain amount of time because it wasn't apparent that we were doing lasting damage, as with carbon emissions from all the fossil fuels we burn in every form or other. It took people a long time to recognize that this was causing a huge problem in the atmosphere and warming our whole planet, and still people deny it.
Absolute zero, like COVID-0, is a radical term, and if taken literally, means absolutely zero carbon emissions. It goes above and beyond carbon neutrality, or net zero, the current fashionable extremist terminology. Carbon is the building block to life on Earth, and the misanthropic, ideological zealots who wish to deny this fundamental principle are distorting reality to match their hidden humanicidal impulses. Furthermore, anthropogenic carbon emissions are a result of man's movement, and in order to stop man's movement, you must do so by force of totalitarian regime. Worse yet, every breath emits carbon, therefore in order to reach absolute zero, absolutely every breath must be eliminated. If we do not recognize the extremely dangerous ideological path we are being forced onto, the so-called rights of the planet may be written into law with abominations like the Terra Carta, replacing the Magna Carta's fundamental Enlightenment principles, the natural rights of man. So-called stakeholder capitalism is the new collectivist mechanism for propelling people worldwide into the grandest form of totalitarianism ever imagined. A global eco-dictatorship, green on the outside, red on the inside.
This year's lockdowns have caused emissions to fall dramatically, but emissions are already rising again, in some places surpassing pre-COVID levels.
In a green new world, human enslavement is inevitable, and the elimination of movement means the eradication of man.
And the time to act is now.